year is 1793. The French Revolution has collapsed into chaos, and one of France's greatest musicians is jailed. The son of a slave, Le Chevalier de Saint-Georges rose to become one of France's most popular heroes. But here in prison, the legacy of a man who has been called Le Mozart Noir will be lost to history. Saint-Georges is a man of remarkable achievements. Europe's greatest fencer, a renowned violinist, and a composer who influenced Mozart. Tragically, his music will not be heard for another 200 years.
He, as a character, is a mystifying, alluring, just a bigger-than-life kind of human being. I mean, most people are astonished when I tell them there's a composer who happens to be black during the time of Mozart. People are surprised. That can't possibly be.
There's no doubt about it that the Parisian public adored him at the time. He was exotic. He was one of the best violinists they had, and he turned Paris into the Mecca of symphony.
I'm interested in Saint-Georges, and I'm discovering that other musicians in other parts of the world are interested in Saint-Georges at the same moment. Something is happening astrologically, or I don't know what it is, that can account for that. But there's a certain style in the air. There's a certain spirit, musical spirit in the air.
Saint-Georges awaits his calling to the guillotine. Such a momentous death would befit the epic life that this remarkable outsider has lived. The story of classical music's first black composer begins a continent away. Saint-Georges was born in Guadeloupe on Christmas Day, 1745, to a rich colonialist and his slave mistress. The Bellon family fortune is founded on sugar, coffee, and the labor of African slaves. Saint-Georges' prospects in Guadeloupe are meager because the law prevents mulattoes from owning land. So the father, a minor aristocrat, makes a bold decision to take his slave mistress and mulatto son to Paris in hopes of turning him into a French gentleman.
The relationship between Saint-Georges' father and him, there was just a real attachment between him and his son. He may have just found it impossible not to take him with him. He may have just adored him.
The main gist, I think, the main thrust of the father's ambition for the boy was to see whether he could get him into society.
Young Saint-Georges arrives in Paris as the age of enlightenment is dawning. His father hopes to offer his son a freer life in an international cultural capital. The most contemptuous attitudes see blacks as animals without souls in a time when the slave trade is still rampant and lucrative.
Being somehow between two worlds, one of which is in the lowest social strata, slaves, and the other one in the higher social strata, the aristocrats, this must have made him very insecure.
Fencing is the sport of the aristocracy and a ticket into society. Saint-Georges is enrolled by his father in Lavoisier's prestigious Academy of Fencing at 13 years old. Young Saint-Georges seizes the opportunity to prove himself. A disciplined and model student, he devotes countless hours to training, developing his talent to an extent that dazzles everyone, including Lavoisier's son, who writes, "At the head of all my father's students must be placed the inimitable Saint-Georges. At 15, he was beating the strongest fighters. At 17, he acquired the greatest speed. He astonished with his agility, and he never hurt anyone." But Saint-Georges' reputation as a great fencer raises the ire of many whites, and he receives challenges from across Europe.
Actually, we have a kind of a proof of his father's ambition for him and how he pushed him. And that is the incident when another fencing master by the name of Picard started sending messages to Paris saying that he wanted to fight Boissier's mulatto, which was pejoratively used by him at the time.
Hurt by Picard's racial condescension, Saint-Georges is unwilling to accept such an ignoble challenge. But his father persuades him that every fight is a chance to prove his worth and preserve his honor. Saint-Georges defeats Picard, but mindful of challenges to come, he returns with renewed focus to the hours of solitary training. To further Saint-Georges' aristocratic education, his father employs the great composers of Paris, Gossec, Leclerc, and Lully, to teach his son to play the violin. With this turn to music, Saint-Georges discovers his calling. He devotes himself completely to mastering the violin.
His technique was extraordinary, almost as if the virtuoso fencer transferred his right-hand technique with the sword to the bow.
Each year, Saint-Georges' teacher Gossec organizes special concerts featuring the best musicians from across France, united in one orchestra called Les Concerts des Amateurs. He invites Saint-Georges to play first violin. It is a daring choice. Saint-Georges is an anomaly in the white world of high society concert music, but he is not intimidated, and his performances are virtuosic. The young violinist is rewarded with an enthusiastic reception from Parisian audiences.
I really believe that him being a mulatto in a white society made him work harder towards being recognized.
Saint-Georges quickly masters the contemporary repertoire. Inspired, he turns to composition as a new way to challenge himself. He becomes passionate about discovering the limits of the violin and how far they can be pushed.
The way that he wrote his music is so indicative of somebody who's like, I gotta be number one, I gotta be up there.
His writing is very virtuosic. It's clear that he could get around the instrument very easily and had no technical limitations whatsoever in any regard.
Saint-Georges' virtuosic experiments on the violin lead him to discover the instrument's potential to spar against the orchestra in new, more aggressive ways. The result is a dynamic new form of music, the symphony concertante, which is legendarily challenging for performers.
When you play the concertos of Saint-Georges, you're not going to have a walk in the park. You're going to sweat a little bit.
Even in some modern repertoire, I've never played quite as high on the fingerboard. I mean, what is it? I mean, I'm way up there. He keeps shooting you up there and then immediately back down. So I had to figure out how to do that.
Oftentimes your hands will be, like this, or you'll be asked to do all these different things and come up with all sorts of interesting bowing. This is exciting for the audience. It's exciting for me.
There was like about 4 measures that were just going to break me, or every night I kind of went like, oh my God, am I going to get it tonight?
The way that St. George used the bow and the technique and the effects that he produced must have surprised Mozart when he was in Paris, because we know that when he went back from Paris, he wrote one of the greatest works, the Symphony Concertante in E-flat major for violin and viola. And there we know that there is an influence directly from St. George, because there is a passage which is very uncomfortable because virtuosically it's difficult, which towards the end of Mozart's Symphony Concertante in E-flat sounds like this. And the St. George Concerto, Opus 5, number 2, has a passage that in E major goes. You see, there is a difference. It's half a tone higher. Mozart's in E flat and he's in E major. But they're identical, and they're not typical passages used at the time.
St. George's performances gain him celebrity in European high society. In 1773, he is appointed to direct Gossek's Concert des Amateurs. It is a triumph for this ambitious outsider. The doors to the ruling class are opened, and St. George makes himself a fixture in the courts of the aristocracy. He is even invited to Versailles and plays with the Queen, Marie Antoinette. St. George begins to win a reputation among society women for his exotic looks and growing fame. Their courtship of St. George makes him believe that he might truly become one of their own.
St. George obviously was a great lover. This man was a ladies' man. I think he was a serious, serious ladies' man.
He certainly had his share of love affairs, it seems. He seems to have seduced everybody's wife, all the prominent noblemen of the time.
His liaisons with women probably gave him a lot of satisfaction in more ways than one. But he was unmarriageable as far as European society was concerned.
Not being able to get married must have been a source of undeniable sorrow for him. Not being able to have someone that would even consider you for a long-term relationship.
For all his achievements, St. George has yet to find a true love amongst the women of Parisian society. Until he meets the young Marie-Joseph, wife of the old general, Montalembert. Marie-Joseph becomes Saint-Georges' one great love.
And according to two neighbors who were writing gossip cum journal at the time, their diaries mention the fact that there seemed to have been a baby which the general did not accept as his own.
For Saint-Georges, having a son out of wedlock with a woman he loves is like reliving his parents' romance. He would have the same hopes for this new baby that his father had had for him.
When his son was born, it must have, obviously, it gave him the image of the possibility of being a father. It never happened.
On the orders of Marie-Joseph's husband, the wet nurse neglects the baby and lets it die.
The second movement of the concerto really felt like he was having an emotional response to some event in his life. It really touched me like in my gut somehow. It just really pulled something out of me that I hadn't expected actually to experience with his music.
What I love about the second movement of the violin concerto is, again, the simplicity of the elements that he uses. If you listen to the violas and the second violins, and the opening is just one note. And then on top of that kind of thing. And on top of this melody. Just tender sighs. What could be simpler? 3 notes and 1 note in the accompaniment, and yet it's so moving. And this is what a great composer does. A great composer takes 1 note or one very simple element like and builds on it, and somehow it touches you more deeply than something very complex and convoluted. It's like great poetry or something where you just the right word, and it might be a very familiar word, but it's when, where, and how that makes all the difference.
In 1776, Saint-Georges' career is still on the rise. He sets his sights on the most prestigious musical position in France, director of the Paris Opera. It is a symbol of national culture, the Hollywood of its day, teeming with prestige and allure and gossip. Saint-Georges leads a group of entrepreneurs who are bidding for control of the opera house. Word spreads through Paris that Saint-Georges' acclaimed talent makes him the king's favorite choice. However, when members of the opera company hear that Saint-Georges will be their new director, there is an immediate reaction. The opera's three leading divas are powerful women, and they quickly assemble a petition to send to the Queen. They write, "Our honor and the delicate nature of our conscience could never allow us to submit to the orders of a mulatto." It is the most public racial humiliation of his life.
He was denied that job. In fact, no one got the job at that point. There was no one else qualified to... It wasn't as if there were two qualified people and they took the white man. There was, in fact, no one else qualified at that moment in time, which must have made it even twice as painful. They took no one.
But St. George, while I'm sure he spent days, perhaps weeks, in seclusion, not seeing anyone, was not discouraged about his ambitions in writing opera, because he went on to write 6 or 7.
Saint-Georges continues composing concertos too, still supported by important patrons. He commissions Franz Joseph Haydn to write what will become the Paris Symphonies. Saint-Georges has the honor of conducting their world premiere. The successes of Saint-Georges lead him to the court of the Duc d'Orléans. Here Saint-Georges finds a new friendship with the Duke's son, Philippe, who will take Saint-Georges' life in a surprising new direction: politics. Philippe is a liberal aristocrat who invites Saint-Georges to join the reform movement, which promises democracy, equality, and an end to racial discrimination and slavery in France. Saint-Georges has spent a lifetime hiding his slave lineage, so it is a difficult decision for him to join the fight for reform. Over time, however, he becomes a convert. Philippe takes Saint-Georges on a trip to London, England, where the anti-slavery movement is far ahead of France. There he is feted as a celebrity, but most importantly, he meets with leaders of the anti-slavery movement and is inspired by their belief in abolition. His eyes are open to the possibility of fighting for others of African descent who have not been granted his opportunities. He returns with Philippe to France, invigorated by the culture of reform. However, the reform movement has begun to erupt into revolution. When pressures for reform fail to topple the monarchy's power, the people of France take up arms and force the king to abdicate. A new republic is born with a new people's government, and a new role for Saint-Georges that he never could have imagined. Monarchist forces in Austria, Germany, and Spain, allies of the deposed king, attack. The new government must raise an army to defend the Republic. They turn to Saint-Georges, the composer, and invite him to become Saint-Georges, the soldier. He's famous for his swordsmanship, but has never been to war. He has navigated the treacheries of high society, but has no tactical skills for the battlefield. He's asked to lead a battalion. It is a daunting task. As an artist, he could avoid the front line, but in the belief of emancipation, he commits his life to battle. Black men in France rally to the summons of the country's most famous mulatto. He raises a regiment 1,000 soldiers strong, the Saint-Georges Legion. He leads his men heroically in battles that repulse the Austrian invasion. Saint-Georges should be acclaimed a war hero, but the revolution plunges into chaos. The fledgling democracy is strangled by warring factions, by panic and suspicion. The king is executed. The reign of terror begins. But the guillotine is not just for the king. It is readied for anyone with ties to the upper classes, and that includes Saint-Georges. Saint-Georges has spent his life committed to the hopes of his father, using every talent to pursue a place among the aristocracy. But now, in 1793, these former ambitions are his death sentence. Arrested, imprisoned, he awaits execution. Saint-Georges' close friend and mentor, Philippe d'Orléans, eager to distance himself from the aristocracy, changes his name to Philippe Equality. But under the reign of terror, nothing can protect him from his fate. While Saint-Georges, deposed leader of the Black Battalion, is in prison, the French government abolishes slavery. Still believing himself a part of the revolution, Saint-Georges furiously petitions the Citizens' Council from prison. In this, one of his only surviving letters. Citizen Director, I have constantly demonstrated my loyalty to the revolution. I have served it with a tireless zeal, undiminished by the persecutions I have suffered. I have no other recourse but that of being reinstated in my rank of soldier. I address myself to your sense of justice. He signs his name simply Georges. His plea is refused. One by one, his friends are washed away in blood. The society he once knew is no more. His music, now associated with a decadent age, is drained of respect and drifts into obscurity.
How much of his music is left is a very good question. What we have now is about a third of it. I don't think there's a hope of finding all of it. I'm sure some of it just simply got burned in some building in the French Revolution or something and just is no more.
I think black children need to know that there was a great composer in the European style I think we all need to know that. I think that whether the kids be Asian or Caucasian or what have you, Jewish, I don't care. But he certainly is an important enough person as a composer, an important enough person as a character of history, that I think that it's criminal to submerge him beneath the waves of history.
It is important, I think. That's an important aspect, that it wasn't just the white guy who was being supported by royalty and making this kind of music. The arts belong to all of us, whatever color or sex or religion we are. It belongs to all of us.
As a performer, I think my job is to play the music, get it out there, get people to know the story and to appreciate the music, and to be curious, because once people are curious about the music, that creates a demand, and then somebody will have to do this publication, won't they? So it's just to promote it. It's to exposure as much as possible.
I'm hopeful that the music of Saint George now enters into the concert scene, and that we don't lose track of this again.
In 1794, Saint-Georges is spared execution by a benevolent commissioner. He lives his remaining years as a commoner abandoning his earlier ambitions and playing with small orchestras. At 54, he dies, unmarried.
My favorite part in St. George? Wow. Okay.